Around 5 or 6 years ago, I decided I was going to make my own game. I loved playing video games, and at some point I thought, how hard can it be to make one? So I started looking. How can I make my own game? Back then, I did not know if there was even game engines that I could use, and finally, I found Unity. And as every beginner, I started watching tutorials and copy-pasting codes, as if I understand anything at all. For my first project, I decided to make a multiplayer racing game. I didn't start small. I wanted AI cars, a lap system, car selection, an upgrade shop, and online multiplayer. I barely understood what a variable was. I had no idea how networking worked. But in my head, it sounded cool, so I went for it. My PC was struggling constantly. Unity would freeze, sometimes the scene wouldn't even open properly. I would try to fix one bug and somehow create 3 new ones. But I was working on it almost every night, sometimes until 2 or 3 in the morning. I even made a Facebook page for the game because I genuinely thought I would release it. Looking back now, that project was way too big for my level. But at the time, I didn't see it that way. I was just excited. After that, I tried something smaller, a 2D platformer. This time, I wanted to keep it simple. I made a basic main menu. It didn't fully work, but it switched scenes. That felt like progress. I built a simple 2D character controller. Move left, move right, jump. Nothing special. But this was the first time I started understanding small pieces of what I was doing instead of just copying code blindly. I still used tutorials, but I began connecting things together instead of just following steps. Then I decided to make an RPG. Movement, rolling, jumping, skills, combos, healing, some basic level design. In my head, it was going to be a full fantasy experience. In reality, it was a collection of half-working systems. But during this project, I started thinking more about how systems connect. How should combat flow? How do abilities interact? How do you structure mechanics so they don't completely break each other? I didn't finish it, but I understood more than before. After that, I moved into FPS experiments. I built ammo systems, weapon switching, muzzle flashes, bullet impacts, sound triggers. This was when I started caring about how things feel. Not just whether the gun shoots, but whether it feels responsive. How fast does it reload? Does the recoil feel strong enough? Does the sound match the animation? These were small projects, but they helped me understand player feedback better. Then I went back to platformers again. But this time, I focused almost entirely on movement. I kept adjusting gravity, jump height, acceleration, deceleration. Small numbers that completely change how a character feels. I actually had plans to turn it into a bigger game. And then I stopped working on it. There wasn't a dramatic reason. I just moved on to something else. At that time, I had a habit of starting projects and not finishing them. Then I started something called Project War Z. It was inspired by Call of Duty Zombies. I liked the wave survival concept and the World War II theme. I started building wave logic, enemy spawning, basic zombie AI. I was really motivated for this one. And then I reinstalled Windows. I didn't back up the project. Everything was gone. That was the moment I learned about backups the hard way. After that, I decided to try Unreal Engine 4. It felt more complex at first. Blueprints were confusing. The node system looked overwhelming compared to what I was used to. But once I understood the logic, it started making sense. I built a small dungeon-style combat prototype, basic attack system. I used marketplace assets for characters and animations. I even experimented with simple cinematic camera shots. At that time, I thought it looked amazing. Now I see all the beginner mistakes. But it was progress. Then came my first finished and released game. It was made in Unity, and it became my first published game on Google Play. I worked on it for around 7 or 8 months. That was the longest I had ever worked on one project. There were many small issues, UI problems, performance tweaks, gameplay balancing, but I kept fixing things until it was done. Publishing it felt very different from just starting something. It wasn't perfect, but it was complete. Around this time, I started working on Fiverr. Game development stopped being just a hobby. It became real work. One of my first client projects was about a baby trying to escape from a crib using toys. You had 60 seconds before your mom comes and makes you sleep. It sounds funny, and it was, but it taught me something new. Deadlines, communication, revisions. Working for someone else forces you to think differently. Another Fiverr project was an endless runner pixel game. You had to avoid obstacles, shoot enemies, and compete on a leaderboard. Technically, it wasn't extremely complex, but delivering something stable and polished for a client felt different than working on personal ideas. Then I worked on an educational game for a client. It was focused on ethical work, anti-corruption, and workplace safety. The game was divided into missions teaching different concepts. It wasn't action-heavy, but it required structure, clarity, and proper system design. I worked on it for several months. It was a different type of project compared to shooters or combat systems. The next game I worked on was for a German payment company. That was actually a really good experience because for the first time, I wasn't working alone. I was part of a small team of 3. It was a platformer action game with a superhero as the main character. The project took a couple of months to complete, and it was definitely more serious than the ones I had made before. By the end of it, I was genuinely proud of what we built. At one point, I also tried learning 3D animation in Blender. I made a simple car animation, nothing advanced, but I wanted to understand the animation pipeline better. That experience later helped me when working with character animations inside engines. Then I decided to build a Souls-like game in Unreal Engine 5. I love that genre. I started with the game animation sample project. I built inventory systems, enemy AI, boss logic, combat combos, equipment systems. Technically, it worked, but the project became messy. Blueprints were not organized well, systems were tangled together. It felt chaotic. Eventually, I stopped working on it. Not because it was terrible, but because I knew I could build it cleaner. Then I recreated the Resident Evil 8 main menu system in Unreal. I'm a big fan of that series. The background I used wasn't mine, but I focused on recreating the interface behavior. Up until that point, I mostly focused on gameplay systems. Working on UI taught me how important presentation is. Menus are part of the experience too. After that, I started another Souls-like project. But this time, I built everything from scratch. No pre-made systems, no shortcuts. I built smooth movement, directional rolling, dodging, target locking, AI behavior, combat flow. And this time, it felt more structured, cleaner, more intentional. It showed me how much I had improved compared to earlier projects. And now, I'm working on my current project, a fully modular FPS system in Unreal Engine 5, with my own first-person animations made in Blender. I've built movement systems, weapon switching, dynamic recoil inspired by Insurgency Sandstorm, grenade systems, leaning, crouching, sliding, vaulting, and 8-direction locomotion. I also worked on dynamic HUD elements, hit markers, and crosshair systems. But the biggest difference now isn't just features, it's organization. Now I think about scalability, reusable components, clean folder structures, modular systems that can expand. Compared to where I started, the difference is huge, and I'm still building.